sincerely think that being or not being a leader is not a choice, because each of us are born and being tasked to be a leader one way or another. It is rightly mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah ayat 30 that kita perlu menjadi khalifah di muka bumi ini. Itu adalah tugasan diberikan kepada Allah pada kita. Therefore, being a leader is not a choice. For that matter, we need to understand what leadership is all about. And leadership is never about power, it's never about stature, but it's more of responsibility and the amanah and accountability that is being given to one person. For that reason, the kind of leadership that we practice need to be governed, need to be guided through our clean heart.
Have your legacy. Show your true potential. Let people learn from you. Be an icon. The extra things from all of us, apart from being academicians, is the ability to lead, because our institutions, the future of our generation, the future of Malaysia depend on all of us at the institutions of higher learning.
Be strategic leader and be successful leader for the good of our organization. I believe the series is designed and implemented based on the assumption that leadership does matter. Leadership in most cases, if not all cases, determine the success and the failure of any organization.
Akademi Kepimpinan Pendidikan Tinggi, or in short, AKEPT, is one of the agencies under Ministry of Higher Education that focuses in competencies and values development among leaders and future leaders of higher education. Many programs and modules have been designed to strengthen the competencies of leaders and future leaders. Meanwhile, a diverse group of speakers and trainers are invited and included to share their expertise, experiences, and knowledge. Apart from gaining valuable experience from great speakers, participants will also be able to build strategic networks through engagement from different institutions. Center for Leadership Development, or in short CLD, is one of the centers under AKEPT organizational structure that plays a crucial role in designing and organizing leadership development program. The CLD leadership program is designed based on the AKEPT leadership competency model that has a lifespan of 2 to 3 years due to the changing demand and expectations of higher education. Programs organized under CLD are competency-based and organized in small groups of 30 to 40 participants as to allow for interaction and discussions to take place. There are 4 main categories, which are AKEPT Signature Program, AKEPT Smart Partnership Program, AKEPT Leadership Onboarding Program, and AKEPT Academic Leadership Program. These categories are to cater to a more structured and holistic approach in determining the contents of each and every program. The main objective of programs organized by CLD is to align with the competency model and strengthen competencies among incumbents of key positions in higher learning institutions. Academic Leadership Program comprises of 11 modules that are grouped into 3 domains, which are self-leadership, team or peer leadership, and organizational leadership. The contents are dedicated to the context and pretext of higher education in building competent academics in areas related to academic leadership. The spirit of Academic Leadership Program is to understand the philosophy of being an academic leader who will eventually become public intellectuals or referred academics in the field of expertise. It is truly important for all academics to be exposed through sharing of experiences by renowned academics. We believe in storytelling, case study, intellectual discourse, experiential learning, and exchange of ideas as our approaches in promoting programs under Center for Leadership Development. Do join us at AKEPT as we will not just offer programs in our manual list, but the enriching and extended network that can be obtained from the sessions in which we have a blend of public as well as private universities participants. Shaping minds, building leaders is our principle, and our hope is all academic will be able to have the opportunity to be engaged with AKEPT in roles as speakers, facilitators, coaches, trainers, and participants.
Today, at the dawn of a new day, 1 in 5 live on less than $1 a day. Where clean water is scarce, where healthcare is limited, where even one meal is hard to find, a brighter future can seem an impossible dream. But we can make a difference to the things that matter. Today, I will make a difference. Today, I will nurture them. Today, I will transform them in their everyday, every song, every life, every dream, and every seed of hope. For them, their children, and their children's children. A brighter tomorrow awaits. Through the power of our commitment, today, we will make a difference.
Morning. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Yes.
Yes.
I sincerely think that being or not being a leader is not a choice, because each of us are born and being tasked to be a leader one way or another. It is rightly mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah ayat 30 that kita perlu menjadi khalifah di muka bumi ini. Itu adalah tugasan diberikan kepada Allah pada kita. Therefore, being a leader is not a choice. For that matter, we need to understand what leadership is all about. And leadership is never about power, it's never about stature, but it's more of responsibility and the amanah and accountability that is being given to one person. For that reason, The kind of leadership that we practice need to be governed, need to be guided through our clean heart.
Have your legacy. Show your true potential. Let people learn from you. Be an icon. The extra things from all of us, apart from being academicians, is the ability to lead, because our institutions, the future of our generation, the future of Malaysia depend on all of us at the institutions of higher learning.
Be strategic leader and be successful leader for the good of our organization. I believe the series is designed and implemented based on the assumption that leadership does matter. Leadership in most cases, if not all cases, determine the success and the failure of any organization.
I sincerely think that being or not being a leader is not a choice, because each of us are born and being tasked to be a leader one way or another. It is rightly mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah ayat 30 that kita perlu menjadi khalifah di muka bumi ini. Itu adalah tugasan diberikan kepada Allah pada kita. Therefore, being a leader is not a choice. For that matter, we need to understand what leadership is all about. And leadership is never about power, it's never about stature, but it's more of responsibility and the amanah and accountability that is being given to one person. For that reason, the kind of leadership that we practice need to be governed, need to be guided through our clean heart.
Have your legacy. Show your true potential. Let people learn from you. Be an icon. The extra things from all of us, apart from being academicians, is the ability to lead, because our institutions, the future of our generation, the future of Malaysia depend on all of us at the institutions of higher learning.
Be strategic leader and be successful leader for the good of our organization. I believe the series is designed and implemented based on the assumption that leadership does matter. Leadership in most cases, if not all cases, determine the success and the failure of any organization.
Academy
Hello, good morning everyone. I would like to remind all our participants to kindly switch off your microphone and video cam throughout our webinar today. Thank you very much for your cooperation. Welcome to the international webinar on Women in Higher Education, Advancing Leadership in a V.U.C.A. World, organized by the Higher Education Leadership Academy, AKEPT, School of Educational Studies, USM, National Higher Education Research Institute, and University Science Malaysia. A very good morning to the honorable speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. In conjunction with the International Women's Day 2022, today's webinar will be focusing on empowering the roles of the women leader in the higher education in this volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity world. This webinar aims to explore the state of gap of the women leaders in Malaysia higher education institutions and to provide recommendations related to women in higher education in enhancing and supporting the National Women Policy, the Women Development Action Plan, Shared Prosperity Vision 2030, Rancangan Malaysia ke-12, and KPT Strategy Focus. Without further delay, I would like to invite the Honorable Datuk Professor Dr. Nasruddin bin Mohamad, the Director of Higher Education Learner Leadership Academy, Malaysia, to deliver the welcoming speech.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera and good morning. The Honorable Professor Datuk Dr. Faisal Rafiq Muhammad Adikan, Vice Chancellor of University Science Malaysia, the Honorable Professor Datuk Dr. Narimah binti Samad, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academic and International Affairs, the Honorable Professor Datuk Engineer Dr. Abdul Rahman Muhammad, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research and Innovation, University Science Malaysia, the Honorable Professor Dr. Azlinda Azman, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Student Development and Alumni Affairs, University Science of Malaysia, the Honorable Professor Dr. Muhammad Roslan Hashim, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Sustainability and Institutional Development, University Science of Malaysia, the Honorable Professor Dr. Rahimi Cik Aman, Dean of the School of Educational Studies, University Science of Malaysia, the Honorable Dr. Muhammad Muftahu, Acting Director of National Higher Education Research Institute, the Honorable Speakers, Prof. Karen Ragoonaden, Faculty of Education, University of Manitoba, Canada, Professor Abi Virakumara Sivam, School of Medical and Life Sciences, Sunway University, Associate Professor Dr. Chai Lei Ching, the Young Scientist Network, Academy of Sciences, Malaysia, honorable guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen. We are honored to welcome the participants of the International Webinar on Women in Higher Education with an apt theme, Advancing Leadership in a V.U.C.A. World. It is indeed a pleasure for us to be able to host this event in conjunction with the Women's Day, which was celebrated globally earlier this month. Although the webinar is conducted at the end of the month, nevertheless, we feel it is apt to have this event as a closure to the celebration by discussing women and leadership particularly. My fellow participants, the International Webinar on Women in Higher Education is organized by Higher Education Leadership Academy, AKEPT, and hosted by the School of Educational Studies in collaboration with National Higher Education Research Centre, or IPPTN, University Science of Malaysia. It is a significant forum that provides a platform for scholars, policymakers, researchers, academics, and administrators of institutions of higher education to share their knowledge, discuss, and debate on setting direction for the women leading the higher education in tandem with the V.U.C.A or V.U.C.A world. In elevating the roles of AKEPT as a leadership academy, we have conducted various types of leadership programs focusing on different groups of participants. It is believed that the programs offered will provide a platform for leaders from higher education institutions to gain knowledge from renowned experts and practitioners. It is through this kind of forum that the sharing of the leaders' insights will help the academic society to think of innovative inventions that will assist to enhance the higher education delivery to the community, particularly for women leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, In conjunction with the International Women's Day 2022, with the theme Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow, this international webinar on women leadership in higher education is an important platform to explore the state of arts and gaps of women leaders in both international and Malaysian higher education institutions. It is high time for us to shatter the age-long belief that women play secondary roles in the development and well-being of our country. In Malaysia, women constitute almost half of the country's population. To be exact, 47.7% of the 32.5 million Malaysian population are women, who play a significant role in the country's development as well as in the socio-economic welfare of our families. Malaysia fully supports the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. The fourth and fifth SDGs aim to achieve quality education as well as to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. The women in Malaysia's HEIs also played active role in advocating Malaysia as an international higher education hub. In 2021, there were more women staff, that is 56.8%, compared to men, which comprise only 43.2% in our public HEIs, which also hosts more women students, that is 61%, compared to men, or 39%. Gender equality is in fact a matter emphasized in SDG 5, is an essential factor in a country's security and stability. Excluding women from actively participating in society can increase the risk of instability. Gender equality is not only about doing what is right or about social justice. It is also an important element in economic development and a critical predictor of stability and security. When women are given a chance to reach their highest potential, the nation stands a higher chance of prospering as a whole. This suggests that achieving gender equality and empowering women today constitute an opportunity to advance a sustainable tomorrow. Gender equality is a fundamental human right and a foundation for peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable societies. Unfortunately, there is still a long way to go to achieve equality between men and women. Despite progress over the last decades, many of our challenges have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, reinforcing stark gender disparities in economic, social, political, environmental realms. In a V.U.C.A world, leaders should be well equipped with the ability to pivot and respond to the dynamic landscape in which they are operating, including updating their knowledge and skills to meet and adapt to this new ever-changing environment. Leaders in higher education institutions are not exempted. While HEI players tend to improve the university performance and deliverables, it is time for women in HEIs to have a full grasp of the current situation to stay relevant and be empowered to face the challenges in the V.U.C.A world. To develop their full potential and role in facing the V.U.C.A environment, women should be given the opportunities to participate in various aspects of leadership in contributing impactful and sustainable changes to the nation's development. Besides, more emphasis should be placed on managing ambiguity, generating confidence and positive attitudes, maintaining the work management of ambiguity, generating confidence and positive attitudes, and maintaining the work-life balance. Hence, it is crucial to explore the current landscape, state of arts, gaps, and way forward of women leaders in Malaysian higher education institutions in positioning themselves as leaders of higher education in the V.U.C.A world. This serves as the main agenda of this international webinar. We strongly believe that the output from this global webinar could provide recommendations related to women in higher education in enhancing and supporting the Sustainable Development Goal 5, concerns gender equality established by the United Nations and the local policies, including National Women Policy, the Women Development Action Plan, the WDAP,
Wawasan Kemakmuran Bersama 2030, WKB 2030, Rancangan Malaysia ke-12, RMK 12, and KPT Strategic Focus. I would certainly like to extend my utmost appreciation to the School of Educational Studies, PPIP, and the National Higher Education Research Institute, IPPTN, University Science Malaysia, as well as Center for Leadership Sustainability, AKEPT, that have been carrying out the other tasks as the Secretary of the International Women in Higher Education, advancing leadership in V.U.C.A world with great commitment. Well done. In the words of Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, I hereby officiate the International Webinar on Women in Higher Education, advancing leadership in V.U.C.A world. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Nasruddin. Before we start our session today, I would like to request all the honorable speakers, distinguished guests, and participants to switch on your video cam and remove your mask for a group photo. Thank you, everyone. Next, I would like to introduce our moderator of the day, Associate Professor Dr. Wan Fatma Zuharah Wan Mustapa, the Director of Commonwealth Tertiary Education Facility Malaysia, who will be moderating the 3 sharing sessions for today.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Amelia. Assalamualaikum and good morning. The Honorable Datuk Professor Dr. Nasruddin bin Muhammad, Director of Higher Education Leadership Academy, AKEPT Malaysia. Our respected speaker, Professor Dr. Karen Ragoonaden, Professor Dr. Abi Verakumarasivam, and Dr. Chai Li Ching, the coordinator of the event, Dr. Tien Limi, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, all right. I think without wasting any more time, I would like to call for our first respected speaker, Professor Karen Ragoonaden. Okay, but first, please let me read her biography. Prof. Karen Ragoonaden is a Dean of the Faculty of Education at the University of Manitoba, Fort Garry campus. Prof. Karen had received her PhD at University of Montreal, Master of Art from University of Manitoba, and also Bachelor of Art from College Université de Saint-Boniface. Okay, Prof. Karen Ragoonaden has lived, studied, and worked in North America, Europe, Africa. Her publication and research interests lie in the area of mindfulness and well-being, culturally responsive pedagogy, and conception of teaching and learning. As qualified yoga instructor, this is very awesome. Okay, the concept of mindful educational practice is an integral component of her research and her practice. And as university teacher and researcher, her focus and commitment to educational leaderships and curricular innovation have been recognized by virtue of her on-campus, professional, and also community work relating to equity, diversity, and inclusion. In 2020, in recognition of her dedication to making a significant impact on culture of teaching and learning, she also received the University of British Columbia Provost Office Teaching Excellence and Innovation Awards. In 2022, she received the Killiam Teaching Prize in recognition of her excellence and teaching. So now I would like to welcome Prof. Karens with the topic Women Leaders Wellbeing in Higher Education in V.U.C.A World and International Perspective. So Prof. Karen, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Zuharah. It is a pleasure to be here. If I could please ask for my PowerPoint presentation to be put up, please. So I'm not quite able to see my PowerPoint. I'm just wondering if it's up. Oh, thank you very much. No rush. Take your time, everybody. Thank you. Yeah, so thank you for that very warm welcome, everybody. As indicated, my name is Karen Ragoonaden. I am presently the Dean of the Faculty of Education at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. So I would like to, if you don't mind putting up my, changing the slide, please, the next slide. So I'd like to begin by beginning with a land acknowledgement. So here in Faculties of Education in Canada, it is customary after the release of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to recognize the Indigenous lands upon which we live, we work, and we play. So I would like to begin by acknowledging that the University of Manitoba is on the lands of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Oji-Cree, Dakota, Dene, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. As we gather today to talk about leadership, about health, about well-being, particularly in a V.U.C.A world, I think it's important to recognize that the years that we have experienced are unlike any others. We have dealt as a global society with a pandemic, with uncertainty, with anxiety, and an overwhelming amount of information being thrown at us, a very real climate crisis, the instability of economic and political powers, and an invasion of the Ukraine most recently. Further, on May 25th, 2022, this will mark the second year has passed since the fateful killing of George Floyd. Many conversations and changes have taken place since that time, but we still have so much further to go. All of these events have fueled the emergence of a V.U.C.A world where anti-racist discourses and grassroots movements calling all of us to engage responsibly, respectfully, and inclusively with one another. And this is still our challenge. I would say that we have proven that we can come together globally. We've inspired one another, and that we can work together. For example, in January 2020, after isolating the COVID-19 virus from patients, Chinese scientists posted online its genetic sequence. And in particular, Dr. Li Wenliang from Wuhan was hailed as a hero for sounding the alarm about the coronavirus in the early days. And thanks to his efforts, pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, Biotech, and Moderna, who work with mRNA platform, don't need the virus to create a vaccine. They simply need a computer, a program that tells scientists what to pull together. So as we consider the future of our world, our V.U.C.A world, we know that thanks to global scientific connections, we are able to make and to work together in a sustainable, healthy manner. I also want to say that this acknowledgement, as we begin the land acknowledgement and contextualize land acknowledgements, also provides me a chance to just simply reflect on the ancestral territories of the lands upon whom I live, work, and play. Next slide, please. So I'm here today to talk about a V.U.C.A, about leadership and about well-being. For those of you who are not aware, the V.U.C.A, of course, is an acronym that was first used in 1987 in leadership theory in particular. And of course, the acronym reflects volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It has now subsequently taken root and has emerged, for example, in strategic leadership programs such as yours, and is applied to a wide range of educational initiatives. And I would say the term V.U.C.A is especially relevant today for us as leaders on this celebrating the International Women's Day, understanding the geopolitical context and complexities that we are all living. Next slide, please. So I'd like to share a little bit about myself. As I've said, I am a former professor at the University of British Columbia. I'm a former advisor to the president at the University of British Columbia, and now I'm a dean at the Faculty of Education at the University of Manitoba. So in terms of my own leadership as a woman, it has been quite a complex and challenging context. And part of me coming together and talking to you is sharing a little bit about my own approaches to health and wellness. As was indicated in the bio, as part of my own cultural heritage, I've been practicing yoga and meditation from a very early age. I am a qualified Kripalu yoga teacher. I'm a certified mindfulness facilitator. And as a matter of fact, if academia had not worked out for me, my plan B was to teach yoga. So the image you're looking at now is during my time at UBC's Okanagan campus. I often looked at this image, was right outside my office window. And this is a circle where we used to gather myself, my students when I was teaching, but also the staff with which I was working, often to learn, to practice, and to focus on our well-being. So we would do our mindfulness practices right here. So as I said in this talk, I will address in particular 3 points: leadership, well-being, and V.U.C.A. So before I begin, I'm just going to invite all of you. I know that you've been invited to turn off your videos, and I firmly encourage that. But I also encourage you to take a moment to just pause, settle down, to be comfortable, whether you're standing or sitting, and just simply be aware of where you are now, your breath maybe, where you are physically, what you're feeling, what you're smelling, what's around you, the sounds. And then just consider yourselves, as leaders, the leadership roles you've taken within your professional lives, but also within your personal lives, and how to marry the two so that you are able to be successful, healthy, and being able to recognize not just your own needs, but the needs of those around you. I just wanted to take a moment for all of you to consider these realities. Thank you. So now the next, we'll go on to the next slide, please. So I wanted to begin by speaking a little bit about well-being. I think it's important, if we're doing a talk in particular about well-being, to truly understand the concept of well-being. We know that in particular, well-being has many definitions. The one I pointed to here is simply just a recognition of the diverse and interconnected dimensions of physical, mental, and social that extend beyond the traditional definition of health as given by the World Health Organization, which is the absence of infirmity. You'll notice here with the the schematics here that well-being also incorporates choices, activities that are aimed at achieving physical vitality, mental alacrity or clarity of mind, social satisfaction, and a sense of accomplishment and personal fulfillment. So I think within our leadership roles, if we just consider, these diverse and interconnected dimensions of what well-being means to us. Next slide, please. So we do know, for example, that the consideration of well-being is really anchored in 3 subdisciplines in psychology. So developmental psychology, which takes into consideration the well-being in terms of growth across a lifespan. Personality psychology, which looks at, in particular, concepts of the self, concept of the individual, and in terms of maturity. But also clinical psychology, which looks at the absence of mental illness and constitutes psychological well-being. So those are very clear sub-disciplines in psychology that address what a well-being is. And in particular, in my own work, and I want to say I'm not a psychologist, but two elements or concepts or theories that have stood out for me that fit into my own practice is distinguishing between the positive and negative affects and defining that balance between happiness, between what is going well in my life and what is not going too well in my life. And also recognizing life satisfaction. So where I am in terms of my own career progression, my own work, for example, as I'm a new dean. I came in as Dean of the Faculty of Education July 1, and also my psychological well-being. Next slide, please. So this is a repeat, so we'll go on to the next one, please. So some of the models in particular of well-being that I looked at as I was considering the work that I was doing, the research that I was doing, is models by, for example, subjective well-being by Diener. And Diener in particular talks about 3 distinct interrelated components of well-being. And so he talks about frequent positive affect, so positive implications in our lives, infrequent negative aspects, but also cognitive life satisfaction. Carol Riff talks about the 6 model factor of well-being, and she includes in the factors self-acceptance, personal growth, purpose, environmental autonomy, and positive relations with others. So relations and connections. Finally, Keys, based on Riff works, talks about flourishing, where he talks about mental well-being and emotional well-being, and where those the balance of those two are important. Next slide, please. So in particular, I come back to Seligman, who is the father, considered to be the father of positive psychology. And within positive psychology, the whole concept of well-being has really attracted a lot of interest. So for example, according to Seligman, in flourishing, in his concept of flourishing, he talks about 3 paths to happiness. So an authentic happiness, he talks about a pleasant life, so a life of enjoyment, a good life where we see the beneficial effects of flow, and particularly a meaningful life. So a life that has meaning, where we have connections to one another. Next slide, please. And in particular, PERMA, so Seligman's theory about positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. So that is the letters, the acronym is the letters of his first, of PERMA. So he considers the fact that we are within, that our emotions are positive, that we're engaged in our day-to-day lives, that our emotions and connections, relations are important, that we have purpose, that when we ask the question, why are we doing what we have, that we do have, an answer for that. And secondly, accomplishments, the lastly, so PERMA. So I consider, as I look at the different psychological, I'll just go to the next model, please. And I'm just going to shut my blind here. I apologize. It is actually 6 p.m. in Canada here, so I'm a day behind you. The sun is shining brightly at me, so thank you. Next slide, please. So I really wanted, this is a theoretical wheel of wellness that I wanted to share with you, and that sort of encapsulates essentially what the different approaches in psychology and in particular Seligman's concept of flourishing, I thought really represent. So where we have the self and the 4 aspects of the self, whether it's our physical, emotional, spiritual self as well, that come into corporation. So how do we incorporate these different facets of ourselves, but, in leadership, considering in particular where we are within our roles, so in education, our families, our communities, and how it is that we look, each and every one of us, for self-care as we're moving forward. So next slide, please. So essentially this research, what shows us is that the concept of well-being, or looking at the term self-care, well-being for us in particular and leaders, is really a very complex, comprehensive facet, which incorporates many different variables. So not just the absence of infirmity, as the WHO, the World Health Organization, puts forward, but looking at our relationships, our communications, our connections, our meaning in life, our ways in which we engage with emotions. So next slide, please. So in my work, as you've said, you know, I have done a lot of work in the area of research in secular mindfulness, in particular in Western society here in North America. I found that the theoretical concepts from psychology in particular, with their focus in particular on the attunement to the self, the attunement to the variables of the environment, of our community, of our families, and our work, has really come together for me in terms of mindfulness and what it is that, you know, mindfulness in particular brings to me as a leader, which I'd like to share with you now. So essentially, some of my colleagues describe, we are noticing in particular, as I'm sure you are, around the world, a real resurgence of women, of gender representation, women in particular, across leadership roles. But along with that comes, of course, the real responsibility to ensure that we are being looked after and that we are being provided with the necessary mentorship as we move into these roles. And oftentimes the way in which we negotiate meetings, in which we address our leadership is very different, in particular to previous models. And that kind of resistance can be wearing and can really impact essentially not just our I would say the actions that we need to take, but also our well-being. So some of my colleagues describe educational leadership, where we're all located, as the full catastrophe of the 21st century. So we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing in the middle of this full catastrophe? And I want to recognize that this is a play on words, reminding us of Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's considered to be the father of secular mindfulness in the West in particular, his book, Full Catastrophe of Living. There is a grain of truth that is deeply embedded in this analogy. In particular, as we try to find a sense of calmness in these times of uncertainty, the simple act of pausing, of just taking a breath, of noticing in particular, and just bringing our attention to one thing and one thing at a time may offer us just a respite, just a moment to be able to gather our thoughts and to think in a responsive way. So I just want us to look at essentially what are some of the definitions that we see of mindfulness. In particular, here I'm looking at Ellen Langer's on my left-hand side, the first definition. So according to Langer, who's an educational psychologist from the University of Harvard, mindfulness is a flexible state of mind, which involves the creation of new categories, an openness to new information, and awareness of more than one perspective. You move down, the Soloway, Poulin, and McKenzie definition, it's something that strengthens one's capacity to pay attention non-judgmentally to one's thoughts, feelings, and body sensation, thus enabling a more skillful response to life's challenges. Kabat-Zinn, 2013, it is an awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally to the unfolding experience of the moment. And lastly, Albrecht and Cohen, it is the natural human capacity which involves observing, participating, and accepting each of life's moments from a state of equilibrium and of loving kindness. So if we consider those definitions, the flexible state of mind, a skillful response to life's challenges, paying attention, noticing, observing, participating, and finding a balance, you'll see that there are many concepts or ideas that can be taken and can be used, in our own practices of leadership. Next slide, please. So in particular, the work that I've been doing, not just in leadership, has really been also related to developing mindfulness, so the act of noticing, of not judging, of responding. Mindfulness is a disposition. So creating an open and calm receptivity along with a realistic attitude about longhand opinions, assumptions, and by that I mean ways of being and ways of doing, biases maybe towards the self and others. Maybe adopting this kind of a disposition can create a supportive, a calming, and non-reacting environments where we all engage in capacities of unlearning and relearning, and where we foster in novel ways well-being, our own concept and individual approaches to well-being. Next slide, please. So I do recognize, of course, that the mindfulness practices that I am addressing here in particular do actually emanate from contemplative practices. I think that that is a very important consideration as we're moving forward. I know in particular, according to the Canadian Charter of Human Rights here in Canada, as we are teaching, we are very limited in terms of bringing forward any kind of spiritual beliefs or traditions. So oftentimes we are caught within the concept of contemplative pedagogy and contemplative practices. But I also think that despite the fact that in the West that these contemplative pedagogy seems to be relatively new, that we really do have to recognize that these are traditions that are integral to Eastern, Western, and Indigenous ways of being and cultures as well. We do see that in the literature, some of the earliest references to mindfulness can be found in Buddhist and in Hindu traditions, with a focus on seeking spiritual enlightenment. And while each of these traditions have their own specific approach to contemplation, their commonality lies in the transformational impact, essentially, of focused awareness, of being aware. So we do know that this is not, that in the West in particular, approaches, John Kabat-Zinn, who's considered the father of secular mindfulness, moved away from more contemplative and Buddhist approaches, but really focused on research that was more quantitative, so based in health sciences in particular, that demonstrated the positive impact of introducing these practices into health. And more recently now, we're seeing a real advent and a push in education. Next slide, please. So how would that impact us in particular in regards to well-being? Well, based on the, I would say, the plethora of studies that we have seen, we've seen that oftentimes mindfulness practices have been associated with positive outcomes relating to emotions, relating to attention, and also a subjective sense of well-being. And if we go back to the theories that we saw, in psychology, we saw that that conception of subjective well-being is so very important, as we consider the paths, our academic and our professional paths that we are taking. I would move on to the next slide now. Thank you. So as we consider as leaders in this VUCA world, when we're dealing, with the vulnerability, the complexity, the volatility, the ambiguity, how is it that we can find time to really, I would say, commit to wellness practices in each of our lives? And I think that that is actually the challenge that we all of us face in particular as leaders. I know that part of the practices that I engage in and lead, for example, in different seminars and talks, have to do with informal practices. So just taking the time to move away, from the multitasking that we're all engaged in and focusing on one thing and only one thing. So informal practice could be, for example, simply if we are eating or drinking, just focusing without the, the ever-present phone in our hands, and just focusing on what we are ingesting. And what it is that we are not necessarily planning to do before or after, but just being focused in that present moment. More formal practices, of course, include whether they be mindful meditation or maybe a physical activity, and that could be done, of course, in a number of and variety of ways. Next session, please. Next slide. Another important component that has come to my attention in the work that I've done is the concept of relational mindfulness. So relational mindfulness is essentially, a term that arises when we are in particular working within groups. So it supports the self-awareness of the present experience, the capacity to connect and become attuned to internal and external. I know in particular that there is a big body of research coming from Australia, from Burroughs in particular, who has written about relational mindfulness. And in particular, she refers to this in higher education as the capacity to support self-awareness and to connect once again with others. And that this is a very important component that builds relational competence amongst professionals when it is actually practiced as part of our professional way of being and doing. And in particular, Kitchen, who is a Canadian researcher, he identifies relational qualities like empathetic understanding, unconditional positive regard, focused attention as important leadership practices as we are engaging in our day-to-day lives. And he posits that these dispositions, this approach to relations, to connections, is an important component of leadership. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we've found, I come to you from the Faculty of Education. We do have a department which looks at educational leadership. Some of you may know my colleague, Dr. Pong Liu, who has been a leader in that regard. But in terms of educational leadership, what we have found is that introducing in particular stress management and resiliency techniques to students has been very beneficial as they engage in their own activities, going out into educational contexts, whether it's the schools, whether it be any sort of a professional practice that they engage in. Oftentimes, our students then go on to different administrative roles within the educational system or within government or within higher education. So our program here, which is called Smart Education as an acronym, is a curriculum that we operationalized and that we share, very openly, without any, I would say, without any financial remuneration on our part. This is part of the mandates that we have decided to do. It is a 7 or 8 page session, which we will be more than willing to share with you. Was there a question? I'm not sure. Okay. So if you're interested in the Smart Education, it is a UBC copyrighted curriculum about stress management and resiliency techniques, and we would be more than willing to share this with you. Please, next slide, please. So I'd like us now to just maybe take a moment, each and every one of us, and to consider what it is that you do within your field, within your leadership experience, and what it is you do to look after your own well-being. So we'll just take a moment. Next slide, please. Part of the research that I've been engaged in has to do with researching and discussing and asking, examining what are some of how mindfulness practices impact well-being, particularly in higher education. And these are some of the participant responses that we have received. Slowing down the mind, the body, allowing yourself to appreciate the small things. And this is after the Smart Education curriculum, the program that we had engaged in. Being more aware, reminding me to take a pause, be more non-reactive, being able to refocus. So I'm just sharing these as self-reported, comments from the research that I have been engaged in. Next slide, please. I'm just laughing here at the comment in the chat, the coffee and good music works. I completely agree. Please, next slide. Maybe we can't move forward. Yes, I see planting. I see always feel thankful. Yes, gratitude practice is part of our work as well. I'm just wondering if we could move forward with the next slide. Maybe it's stuck. Thank you. So I really appreciate the comments in the chat here who are telling me, essentially how they're sharing and how they look after their own well-being. And what I would say is these are very informal practices, right? Remembering to take the break for your coffee, planting, Going outdoors. I know in particular that is a big component of the practices that we lead here, is doing them outdoors, is being outdoors, moving away, from the four walls of building, feeling the fresh air, the sun, the wind, and recognizing the impact, on our own wellness. I see Zumba as well. Yes, I completely agree. If we can have next slide, please. I'm really liking your answers in the chat. This is wonderful. Good food. Lastly, I would like to just mention, of course, the importance of communities of practice. So one of the things we've noticed as we engage, in our leadership roles is the importance of having connections and relations. One of the first things that I did as the dean at the University of Manitoba was I reached out to other new leaders in my field. So other men and other women who were new deans as well. And to this day, we still meet on a regular basis as communities of practice. So sharing our issues, sharing the solutions, sharing policies and practices. And I would have to say that those communities of practices that we have had together have really helped make my well-being truly more achievable, and understanding that I have that support. I find oftentimes as leaders, we tend to be isolated. We, of course, if we're leaders, we don't have that same relationship or friendship relationships that we would have with colleagues. And we tend to be isolated, in our own offices. So reaching out and finding those individuals who support us is of utmost importance. Next slide, please. I would say, of course, that we are all facing challenges, as women, as leaders in particular, coming back to the whole concept of V.U.C.A, the volatile, uncertainty, ambiguous world that we live in. And how is it that we engage along with the rest of the responsibilities and roles that we have within society, within our own work environments, with these challenges, with these. And so these are some of the comments that some of my the participants in our research indicated, that oftentimes the practices, when they were done, maybe in communities together, work, but that was not possible once they went back into the day-to-day lives of their personal lives. It was challenging sometimes for some to practice with other adults. And I think that just points out to the importance of finding individual practices that work for each and every one of us. And then, of course, there was the comment about working on non-reacting. So in leadership roles, finding the time to pause, to listen. And even if sometimes the comments are directed at us personally, to just simply take a moment and respond instead of react, and simply being aware of physical emotions, as we're going through these very stressful moments. Next slide, please. I would say that an important component of well-being, as we are considering, different stressful, controversial environments, is that mindful attunement. As I said before, the importance of understanding emotions. For example, that emotions are simply appear, that we cannot control them. And that we need to move away, I think, a little bit from the concept of bad emotions or bad emotions or negative emotions. We simply are subject to whatever arises in the moment. What we can do is take the time, though, to respond, to understand why we are feeling this way. And I think part of it is also understanding our physical reactions, our shortness of breath when we're under stressful situations, when we feel as if we're being attacked and we go on the defensive. Definitely heart palpitations, clamminess of the hands. So coming to understand when we are feeling, these physical sensations, these high emotions, how do we get to a point where we look at how we can be better attuned, right, with our internal and external experiences, and how we can moderate those behaviors so that we model good leadership, but also support our well-being. Next slide, please. So I think this is the big question for us. How is it that we can ensure long-term sustainability to our wellness practices? I think that within the context, I recognize I'm talking to a global audience here, and I really appreciate Yes, I see some questions here. Really appreciate the different contexts that we're in. I have a question here about long-term, how to find the balance between work, family, and personal life. I would say that it is an ongoing challenge, but that I do, and I'm sharing this with you, whether it's my cup of coffee first thing in the morning. I'm an early riser. I'm up at 5 a.m. I have my coffee on my own. Sometimes the sun hasn't risen, sometimes it has, and I enjoy that moment. I also am a very, very dedicated yoga and meditation practitioner, and I will take an hour, whether it's at the end of my day. It's always the same hour, so it's kind of odd, but I like to do that between 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So that is my time that I'm able to rearrange my schedule so that I can have that time. And I agree, the other best dress is in nature, is in the seaside, the jungle, the mountaintops, being outdoors. Next slide, please. Another important consideration is equity, diversity, and inclusion. So understanding the models that we use in terms to ensure our well-being are also ways and habits of mind and ways of being and doing that ensure the inclusion of all voices. So especially as leaders, we tend to listen, or we tend to be very fixated on the voices that speak the loudest. And I think using these practices in particular, where we pause, we notice, we observe, we come to recognize who are the voices in the room who are not speaking, or who is not present in the room and should be present as we are moving forward, making decisions that impact our institutions. Next slide, please. I would say an important component for all of us as leaders is to continue on with professional development in this area. As a new dean coming into this role, I received professional development on budget, on human resources, on promotion and tenure. The one thing I didn't receive professional development on was how to manage and how to ensure, my own well-being. And so that has become, a priority for myself, for my faculty, my staff, and our students as we're moving forward. Next slide, please. And I would say, leadership and education, it is complex, it is challenging. I noticed before that we talked about you are born a leader. Leadership just comes upon you, is emergent. And I would say, yes, there's absolutely, a grain of truth in that. But for those of us who want to stay in leadership, we truly do have to find ways in which we survive leadership. So I look forward to hearing from you in the question and answer period about how we are surviving leadership in these times. And next slide, please. And I think, to conclude, I would say for me personally, I've shared my experiences with you in terms of how mindfulness practices, my yoga practices in particular, meditation practice, have become truly an important component of my leadership. And in terms of my mindful dispositions is something that I have really engaged in, and I'm thoroughly, as you said, committed to. I recognize that this is not the case for each and every one of us. And I look forward to hearing, from you in terms of your own approaches as leaders in this regard. And my last slide, please. I just want to recognize that the research that I've been doing and the work that I presented has been funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me today. It's been very interesting being in this context and listening to your chats. I would like to stop now and open up the discourse, for questions and answers. So maybe if we could stop the slides and I could see some faces, that would be great. Thank you for the chats. I'm really enjoying reading it.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Karen. So I also enjoying all the answer in the chat box. Okay, if you have any question, you may write the questions in the chat box so I can read it to Prof. Karen. But before that, I have one question, Prof. Karen, to you. when it's come to life satisfaction, there are actually two theories. Yeah, the first one is the bottom-up theory, which says the person experience is true overall life satisfaction when he or she is happy with each and every aspect of life, right, including work, personal relationship, health, and other area. Whereas the top-down theory says the people satisfaction will influence their life satisfaction. Okay, as a leader of organization, do you think the top-down theory is more appropriate to be adapted? And if we adapt the top-down theory, okay, where the people satisfaction is a priority, so how about our life satisfaction?
Yes, so thank you. So your question has to do with the implementation of top-down theory and how it relates to life satisfaction, right? And in particular, because of course we're all involved in relationships and connections. So that is very interesting. I would say that my leadership role is quite different. Approach has been quite different to the former dean in this faculty, where it was more of a top-down approach. And I think the faculty, when I came in, and have adopted more of a distributed leadership where I engage in a lot of I will make decisions when I have to, but I engage in consultation. I make informed decisions based on policy and based on procedure and processes. In my experience, I would say that that approach of distributed leadership, and this is of course just me in particular, has worked for me. Because I am able to, it is hard to engage in consultation because you often hear things that are directed at you that do not support in any way life satisfaction, right? Because there are harsh criticisms. When you engage in a consultative process as opposed to top down, then you need to be ready to listen to all opinions, and not everybody agrees with you. So I think once again, life satisfaction to me, it has to do with sort of moving away. I just notice, I observe, I don't judge individuals when they make comments about me or the leadership or the initiatives as much as I can. I will honestly say the breaks that I give myself, when I walk away from my office, whether it's coffee or doing my own practices, is helpful. I hope that answered your question. Yes, and I see somewhere here, love yoga is the best therapy for, I know, I did a yoga class before coming in today. Yes, I completely agree. It is 1 hour where you're just focused on your breath, you're focused on movement, and ending, in a meditative stance. So working through the physical, the emotional, and then coming back to a more spiritual practice. I find that very beneficial. And as you've said before, being outdoors, just simply being outdoors. I live by a lake, so I'm close to the water. That was just my timer to let me know I should stop talking. So I'll stop now and see if there are any more questions. Go ahead. Okay, so there is one. Yes. Do you want me to answer the question in the chat, or? I can't hear you.
Ask for your opinion. Okay. What do you think about me time? Because when you have family, some define this term as selfish. Okay, so how do we put this me time in terms of acceptable in family commitment scenario?
Yes. Yes. So I have 3 daughters. My family, we have 3 daughters, and yes, I would say that balancing, because as we know, our leadership roles, it doesn't end, at 4 o'clock. We go home, we have our time with our families, and we have to define, the needs in particular, of our children, our husbands, as we're moving forward. And I would say, as much as possible, the way that I've been able to do this is incorporate my own children, my own family in my downtime. So whether it be going outdoors for a walk, I really enjoy cooking. So engaging my whole, my family, in cooking practices, which is informal, but just getting them, to concentrate, to be, to take that break from their own workload. I have to say that my girls now are all grown up, so the me time is a little easier for me to engage in. But finding that balance, I will be honest, oftentimes it meant less sleep. That's one of the reasons why I am up so early in the morning at 5 a.m. I've just developed those habits. And I would say trying to integrate and incorporate, my family into my travels, for example. If I go to conferences, I would make a point of bringing, I would try to bring my family with me, but it's very hard finding that balance, and it's very individualized.
Okay, there are more questions for you, Prof. I'm sorry. Lighten the meaning of acceptance when different personality argue on a topic, or especially your partner.
So if I understand my concept of acceptance?
Yes, the concept of acceptance when you argue with your partner.
Yes, yes. So my stance, yes, is really to listen, to be consultative. So I always do accept what the individual is saying. I will say, yes, thank you for that. Even if I don't agree right away, I will say, well, I probably do not have all of the information present. And so my stance has been to listen to these perspectives, accept what I'm hearing, and then go back and make an informed decision. But at issue is I have to justify that decision. After I've listened and I've heard the perspectives. And I often do that in writing. I will document everything that I have heard, that I have seen, and then prior to making a decision, explain why this is occurring. Now, what that means is that not everybody is happy with the decision that is made, but the fact that there is a rationale and a justification that accompanies usually the decision has helped. And also we also engage in a policy, in a process where we renew policies every 3 to 5 years, or decisions every 3 to 5 years. So making sure that the decision that was made, let's say, today, March 31st, 2022, may not be applicable, March 31st, 2023 or 2024. So.
Okay, there's another question from Dr. Tian. How about the state of art of women leaders' well-being from an international perspective?
Yes, I would say that as women, we are very aware of our time constraints, and of the many heavy responsibilities that we have had to undertake in institutions in particular. And also the fact that, the way that we are engaging with one another in some cases is very new. I think I found it interesting that, on International Women's Day, that one of the things I've noticed here in Canada is, I am a full professor, but there are very few women who are full professors in Canada. Only 30%, and that's across the nation, are full professors. There's even less female representation in senior administrative roles, and by that I mean deans, provosts, and presidents. Across Canada, there's only been 1 or 2 female presidents who have sat over the course of the last, who sat at the presidency of universities. So what does that mean for us, the state-of-the-art women's well-being? It means that we are still working on what well-being means to us, because the structures that are in pathways that are in place tend to be very male-oriented and male-dominated. And so I think as we sit in these new positions, that it is going to be up to us to define how we are engaging in well-being. So I'll give you a personal example. I'm going to a meeting next week in Montreal for the deans, Canadian Deans of Education. We have reached out as women deans, and we are going to, we have our own sessions that we're engaging in for professional development, conflict resolution in particular, so how to deal with those very personal attacks. And also looking at how we are engaging in our own well-being, like what are we doing, personally. So, and I would come back to communities of practice. We should, if we have people we can reach out to in particular with whom we can share and give us advice. I'll stop there.
Okay, Prof. Karen, I think no more question from the participants, but I still have another question for you. Do you want to answer it?
Go ahead, yes.
Okay, this is about what we call it work burnout. Okay, because sometimes we have work burnout when we have too many responsibility, which leads to frustration sometimes. Okay, and we try to do our best, but other people don't see it's not the best you can do. Okay, so what can we do to help ourselves in this kind of situation?
I always come back to the clinical, psychological, sort of more scientific definitions of well-being, right? And so I think the ability to recognize physically, emotionally, mentally, and maybe even, spiritually, what is going on with ourselves. And that's always a first sign. Usually the first sign of stress is physical, right? So it's lack of sleep, lack of no appetite, a sense of withdrawal. And then, of course, the emotional impact. So the low levels of energy, negative affects, as we've seen, in the literature. So feelings of anxiety, for example, maybe despair, not being able to find joy in the day-to-day, lives. And then lastly, of course, we see as I've said, the physical impact, getting sick. Often we carry our stress, in our lower backs, for example. I would say in the society that we're living in, it is endemic. Back issues are endemic because a lot of our stress is carried within our bodies. Also digestive issues, not being able to eat properly, to digest our food properly. So those are signs, right? And I think that we need to be aware of those signs first and foremost. What to do? You need to take a break. And I know that that is so very hard because we're also deeply, deeply committed, to our work in particular. But finding ways in which we can disengage. So whether it's from our phones, which have now become sort of a part of our appendage of our lives, our work ourselves. I think that's an important consideration. One of the things I'm doing presently with my associate deans and the department heads that I work with is ensuring succession plans. So identifying individuals within our environment, within our institution, who can step in, maybe at a moment's notice, so we have a break. So that's what I would say. Awareness of our own need to take a break, succession plans for sure, having individuals who can step in. And then I always come back to communities of practice. Have your community of individuals, maybe women, maybe men, who can help you.
Okay, thank you for your answer, Prof. So I think it's already 7 minutes. Thank you for your very interesting and meaningful talk. Okay, so we will have a break for 5 minutes, okay, and we will start at 10:15 with more interesting topic after this on the gender equality and equity. Okay, thank you everyone. I see you in 5 minutes time.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.